Welcome to episode number 2 of my SG guitar kit build. In this episode, I'll be doing a dry fit to find out if all the kit parts fit together properly. Then, I'll take measurements on the kit and compare them to common guitar measurements and against Gibson SG specific measurements. Let's start with the neck fit. Kits are notorious for poor neck fit, so I didn't have my hopes up for a perfect fit. Ideally, the neck would fit completely snug inside the neck cavity on the body. Both the body and the neck are marked with the number 37, so I was hoping the fit might exceed my expectations. But as you can see, the neck is very loose. Looking closer at the neck joint, you'll see the gap that's causing the neck to sit so loose in the joint. I'll have to glue wood veneer on each side of the neck cavity to fill the gap. Next, I'll dry fit the rest of the parts. It took a while, so I'll speed it up. I started with the tuners, then did a quick check of the back cover plate. Then, I installed the mounting hardware for the bridge and the stop bar. These are a really tight fit, so I hammered them in using a soft basswood barrier and a rubber mallet. I then moved on to installing the potentiometers, and then the output jack, and the pickup selector switch and the knobs. Next, I added the pickups and the pickguard. I also added the neck again to make sure it would fit along with the neck pickup. I'm surprisingly pleased with the dry fit of the parts. Everything fits tight and solid. Looking closer at the individual parts, the bridge and stop bar fit perfectly. I had some concerns that the mounting holes wouldn't be perfect, causing an incorrect fit, but these fit just right. The pickup selector, potentiometers, and input jack all seem to fit properly in the body. However, the knobs don't seem to sit exactly even with each other, and some of them feel like they might come off in my hands when turning the knobs. I tried replacing the kit knobs with knobs off another guitar, and the new knobs seem to fit much better. Given this loose fit, I plan to replace these knobs. The pot shafts are split shaft coarse spline, so I'll have to replace the knobs with other knobs for this type of shaft. You can also see that the knobs sit pretty far off the face of the guitar. The knobs are already recessed knobs, so changing the knobs won't get them any closer to the body. Rather than replacing the potentiometers, I'll likely just add a washer or a nut on the inside of the guitar body to make them sit a little bit lower. Both the pickups and the guards seem to fit perfectly. Moving up the headstock, the tuners fit really well. It's hard to tell if these are good quality without a comparison, and I really like the Gibson Keystone style tuners, so I still plan to replace these. Let's get more specific and check out the measurements. Here's a few references that I found helpful. First, Building Electric Guitars by Martin Koch. I am so glad I found this book. I bought it on a recommendation from Crimson Guitars, and my only regret is that I didn't buy it any sooner. And while you can probably find all of the information in this book on the internet, you'll save hours of searching and wading through opinions on forums with this book. I also bought some full-scale SG guitar plans from byoguitar.com. It was immensely helpful to have a full-scale plan, but this plan has some flaws, which I'll explain later. I also used the instructions for the BYO Guitar SG kit as a reference, since my kit did not include any instructions. The most important measurements on a guitar are between the guitar nut and the bridge. This is the area in which the guitar strings vibrate. If these aren't right, no other measurements will matter. Let's start with the scale length and fret positions. The scale length is the distance where the string vibrates. Physically, this is the space between the nut and the bridge. For a Gibson SG, this should be 24 3/4 inches. For a guitar to be set up and tuned properly, the 12th fret position should be at the exact midpoint between the nut and the bridge. Each fret must be positioned so that a note played at that position is in tune. There are several fret position calculators online that can tell you exactly where each fret should be positioned based on your scale length. I measured my kit neck from the nut to the 12th fret and expected to measure 12 3/8 inches, which is the midpoint for a 24 3/4 scale length guitar. However, the 12th position is at 12.305 inches, which is about 12 19.5 64ths. That's between 4 and 5 64ths of an inch off from the expectations at the 12th fret. I didn't know if this was a problem or not, so I decided to make a spreadsheet with graphs to understand this better. My initial hypothesis was that the scale length was actually 24 3/4 inches, but the 12th fret was off. To verify this, I measured each fret position from the nut and compared it to the expected position for a 24 3/4 inch scale length guitar. This graph shows the frets on the horizontal axis and how far off each fret's measurement from the nut is from expectations on the vertical axis. As you can see, as you get further up the neck, the frets are further and further off. By the time we get to the 22nd fret, it's short by a full 7.5 64th inches. This means if I put the guitar together by placing the bridge exactly 24 3/4 inches from the nut, then the guitar would play further and further out of tune as it was played up the neck. So at this point, it's obvious that this isn't really a 24 3/4 inch scale length guitar. My next hypothesis was that the scale length was double the 12th fret measurement. When I compared the actual fret measurements to the new expected fret positions, the graph flattened out significantly. Now, the fret positions never differ by more than 2 64ths of an inch. I still didn't have a frame of reference on whether 2 64ths of an inch was acceptable, so I decided to compare this against a few other guitars, assuming each guitar's scale length was double the measurement between the nut and the 12th fret. I compared the accuracy of the fret positions against 3 other guitars. On this graph, the SG kit is the bold blue line. 2 of the guitars were always within a half 64th of an inch, which is probably within my measurement error. The Gibson Les Paul Special started to vary going up the neck and was eventually over 2 64ths of an inch off. I decided to research more. In the book Building Electric Guitars, there's a section about marking fret slots in a fingerboard when you're building a neck from scratch. And in that section, it states that if you mark the fret position and it's off by more than 1 64th of an inch, then you should remark it. Based on this, I'm going to assume that frets shouldn't be off by more than a 64th of an inch. And this kit neck is off by about 1 to 2 64ths from the 1st fret all the way to the 9th fret. I was pretty sick about this, and I went through a lot of back and forth about what to do. I figured I had 3 options. First, I could accept this as the truth and just acknowledge that things don't need to be exactly perfect for my first build. 2, buy a new, higher quality neck that would probably cost $150 or more. Or 3, find a way to fix these frets. Given that this project is a learning experience, I didn't feel like buying a brand new neck was worthwhile. A lot of the skills needed for this build are new to me, so spending a lot of money on an experiment just doesn't make sense. So I decided to see if I could fix the frets by adding a shim between the top of the fingerboard and the nut, thus changing the scale length and therefore the accuracy of each fret's position. This graph shows the impact of adding a shim of increasing sizes. As the shim size increases, the slope of the line rotates clockwise around the 12th fret. This means that, to a point, the low frets would play more in tune, but at the same time the high frets would go more out of tune. I don't really love any of these options. It seems this guitar will be really accurate at the high end or the low end of the fretboard, but not both. This really bothers me, and I've literally lost sleep over it, but at this point I'm leaning towards just leaving it exactly as it is and setting the scale length based on the 12th fret measurement. That means no shim and less accuracy on the low frets. I'm not sure if this will be noticeable or not when the guitar is finished, but I guess I'll just have to wait to find out. Now that I've sufficiently overanalyzed the uninstalled neck measurements, let's take a look at the full scale length measurements with the neck clamped on. To measure the scale length accurately, I clamped the guitar neck to the guitar body with a wooden shim on the back side and a rubber protector on the top. I started with the neck placed as far into the body as possible. I then used a 3-foot straight edge to measure the scale length between the nut and the high E string bridge position with the bridge post moved all the way up as close to the neck as it could go. I want to position the neck so that this measurement is exactly double the 12th fret measurement. which is 24 and 19.5/32 of an inch. To be more accurate, I overlaid a straight edge that's divided into 30 seconds over my longer, less granular straight edge. As you can see here, the measurement looks to be about 24 and 20/32. It's really hard to tell because there's quite a large gap between the straight edge and the top of the bridge. This is really close, but it appears that the scale length is just slightly too long. Ideally, I'd move the neck a little further into the body to get closer to 24 and 19.5/32 of an inch, but the neck is already completely flush against the bottom of the pickup cavity. I'll have to do some adjustments to get the scale length right here. Now let's look at the neck angle. The neck angle is the angle of the neck compared to the body. In this diagram, you're looking at the guitar from the side, with the body on the right and the neck on the left. While I won't be calculating the exact angle, it's important that when you place a straight edge down the neck of the guitar that it just touches the top of the bridge when the bridge is in its lowest position. As we saw when we were measuring the scale length, there's a sizable gap between the top of the bridge and the straight edge. So why is neck angle important? When you have a raised bridge like the Tune-O-Matic on this kit, leaving the neck completely parallel with the body will result in the strings being too far off the fretboard. This becomes an increasing problem as you get to the higher frets on the guitar. The solution is to add an angle, as shown in the middle graph. However, if you add too much of an angle, as shown in the lower graph, then the strings will get closer to the fretboard as you get to the higher frets. This isn't good either. The happy medium is when a straight edge down the neck of the guitar just touches the top of the bridge. In this case, there's far too much space between the straight edge and the top of the bridge. This is preventing me from effectively measuring the scale length because there's such a large gap. I'll have to adjust the neck angle to make this guitar playable. Next, the fingerboard radius. The fingerboard radius is the measurement of the arc of the fingerboard across its width. As radius increases, the neck becomes flatter. Gibson SGs are 12-inch radius fingerboards, so I was pleased to see that this neck measured the same. In this photo, you can see that the radius gauge is flush against the fretboard and isn't letting any light through. Just to confirm, I tried one step down at a 10-inch radius, and you can see the gap at the peak of the arch. I also tried one step up at a 14-inch radius, and at this point you can see the far edge of the radius gauge separating from the fretboard. Based on this, I'm confident that this is a 12-inch radius fingerboard. It's also critical that the nut is set up properly. This is the final factor in the nut to bridge set of measurements. Overall, the nut width appears to be about 1 and 21/32 of an inch. It's important that the edge strings aren't too close to the edge of the fretboard, or else they can slip off the side when you're playing. As a general rule of thumb, the E strings on the edge should be set in from the fingerboard edge by about 1/8 of an inch. And that's exactly how far in these are, so that looks really good. The E to E measurement, or the measurement between the center of each of the edge E strings, is 1 and 21/64 of an inch. This means that there should be 17/64 of an inch between each of the strings. And it appears that the spacing is spot on. I'm really happy with the nut measurements. That's it for nut to bridge measurements. The neck angle and scale length need some adjustment, but the fingerboard radius and the nut measurements look great. Next, let's take a look at the kit compared to the blueprint. The full-scale blueprint gives a lot of really detailed measurements. Given that I've already checked the most important measurements, I'm okay with the rest being ballpark, so I'm not going to be militant about these measurements. Placing the headstock over the blueprint reveals that the headstock is a bit shorter than you'd expect for a Gibson headstock. I'd still like to cut the signature headstock curve into the default paddle style, but as you can see, the headstock will be slightly short. I'll use the same ballpark strategy for the body. Take note of the long neck joint that's typical for Gibson SGs on this blueprint. Overall, the body shape looks pretty close to correct, with the exception of the neck joint, which is very short. This short neck joint is the style of Epiphone SGs. On the blueprint, the body width is shown to be about 1.46 inches. In reality, it's about 1.52 inches. While slightly off, I don't think it would make a significant difference to try and match these measurements, so I plan to leave this as is. While these blueprints were very valuable for the purpose of rough estimation, I wouldn't recommend these for exact measurements unless you were willing to fact-check each measurement. While trying to verify the bridge and stop bar mount positions, I was spun into a panic because the blueprint says that the bridge mount should be 2.97 inches apart, but I was measuring much less. After researching pneumatic bridges and stop bars, I found that the blueprint wasn't accurate. For me, this wasn't a problem, but it's worth a warning in case you plan to buy these blueprints for a from-scratch build. Finally, let's take a look at this kit compared to Gibson and Epiphone SG product photos. Let's start with the back of the body. The kit is on the far left, the Gibson in the middle, and the Epiphone on the right. This view makes the difference in the neck joint very clear. I can't really extend the neck joint on the kit to make it look like a Gibson, so for this it will be more like an Epiphone. In addition, if you look closely, you can see that the bevels along the edges of the guitar are more pronounced on the Gibson than on the Epiphone or the kit. This is most noticeable on the right edge. I think the deep bevel makes a really big difference in the sleek look of the guitar, so I'll be attempting to change the bevel on this kit to look more like a Gibson. If we flip over to the front, there are a few other noticeable differences. At this point, I've noticed for the first time that the rhythm treble ring was not included in this kit. I looked back at the product photos and it's not pictured at all, so I can only assume that it just isn't part of the kit. I'll purchase one of these to keep the look consistent. You can also see in the comparison photo that the kit pickup is positioned right up against the bottom of the neck. Both the Gibson and the Epiphone include a small gap there. It turns out that Gibson has had different designs throughout the years, and during some years the pickup was placed directly up against the neck. The further up the neck pickup is positioned, the warmer the tone of that pickup. Some argue that this warmer tone is really preferable. However, the SG neck is less stable than other necks because the neck meets the body so far up the neck. So the pickup was later moved down to include more wood around the neck joint for increased stability. The neck on this kit guitar will be less stable, but it will have a warmer neck pickup tone due to the pickup's position. This is also going to impact my ability to buy a stock full-face pickguard like the Gibson in the middle. I really prefer this look, but the pickup position means that a stock guard just won't fit. If I decide I want this bad enough, I'll have to cut it myself from a blank. The knobs, output jack, and pickup selector have a slightly different arrangement on the kit. And again, the bevel is much more pronounced all around the guitar, but most noticeably on the left edge. Looking at the bevel from the side shows it a little more clearly across the different guitars. Overall, the measurements were mixed. Most items can be easily fixed. For example, the neck angle and the scale length can be easily solved with standard sanding tools. The neck fit can be fixed with wood veneer. A deeper bevel can be filed and sanded in, and the knobs can be easily replaced. Unfortunately, the fret positioning can be minimally changed with my current skills. I just can't think of a good way around this. But overall, I'm still really happy with the body and the neck of this kit, and I'm excited for how it'll turn out. In the next episode, I'll be making the adjustments to correct the neck angle and scale length. Stay tuned!